November 1942, North Africa. Italian soldiers captured by Allied forces were loaded onto ships bound for America, expecting brutal treatment or even execution. But when they arrived at POW camps and were served beefsteak, hot vegetables, fresh bread, and dessert for their first meal, many refused to eat, convinced it was poisoned or a cruel trick before their execution. These men, whose families back home were starving on rationed bread and thin soup, couldn't comprehend that their prison rations were better than what Italian officers ate. What did these enemy prisoners discover about American power that shattered everything Mussolini's propaganda had told them? And why did over 88% of them volunteer to switch sides and fight for America before the war even ended? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The year was 1940, and Giovanni Rossi had not tasted meat in 6 months. He was 19 years old and lived in a small village in southern Italy called Calabria. Every morning he woke up in his family's stone cottage and smelled the same thing: boiling water and stale bread. His mother would cut one small loaf into 6 pieces for the whole family. Sometimes she added a few beans if they were lucky. Giovanni's little sister was only 7, and her arms were thin as sticks. His father worked in the fields 14 hours each day, but the government took most of the crops for the army.
This was life in Mussolini's Italy. The dictator stood on balconies in Rome and shouted about glory and empire. He said Italy would be great again, like in the days of ancient Rome. He said the Italian people were strong and pure. But in villages like Giovanni's, people were hungry. The government rationed everything. Each family got stamps for bread, for oil, for sugar. But the stamps never bought enough. Women stood in lines for hours just to get a cup of flour. Children learned to ignore the ache in their bellies. When the war started, it got worse. Italy joined Germany and Japan in 1940. Mussolini called them the Axis powers, and he promised they would win quickly. He said the enemy nations were weak and lazy. He said Americans were soft people who only cared about movies and money. He said Britain was old and dying. Italy would take new lands in Africa, and Italian families would have farms and wealth. Giovanni heard these speeches on the village radio. The mayor made everyone gather in the square to listen. Then the army came to Giovanni's village in 1941. Soldiers in green uniforms went door to door. They took every young man between 18 and 25. Giovanni's mother cried and held his hands. His father looked at the ground. The soldiers said Giovanni would be a hero. They said he would fight for Italy's future. They gave him a uniform that was too big and boots that hurt his feet. They put him on a train heading south, toward the sea.
Giovanni became part of General Rommel's Africa Corps. Rommel was a German general, but he commanded Italian soldiers too. They sent Giovanni across the Mediterranean Sea to North Africa. The desert was hotter than anything Giovanni had ever known. The sand burned through his boots. At night, the cold made his teeth chatter. The army gave them food, but not much. Usually it was hard biscuits, sometimes a can of beans, rarely a bit of dried fish. Giovanni thought about his mother's bread every single day. He thought about the olive trees behind his house. He wondered if his sister was getting enough to eat. The fighting was terrible. British soldiers had tanks and guns. Italian equipment was old and broke easily. Giovanni's unit spent weeks walking through the desert, sleeping in holes they dug in the sand, shooting at enemies they could barely see. Men died from bullets, from bombs, from sickness, from the heat. Giovanni wrote letters home, but he never told his family the truth. He wrote that he was fine. He wrote that Italy was winning. He did not write about the friend who died next to him from dysentery, or about the officer who got shot through the neck, or about how his hands shook every night.
November 1942 changed everything. The Americans and British launched a massive invasion.
They called it Operation Torch. Thousands of Allied soldiers landed on the beaches. They had ships and planes and endless ammunition. Giovanni's unit tried to fight back, but it was hopeless. Within days, the order came to retreat. But there was nowhere to go. The desert stretched forever behind them. The ocean blocked them in front. The enemy surrounded them on both sides. Giovanni's captain, a tired man from Sicily, gathered the surviving soldiers. His voice was quiet. "We surrender," he said. "We have no choice." Some of the younger soldiers cried. Some looked relieved. Giovanni felt empty. He had been gone from home for 18 months. He had crossed the sea, survived the desert, and watched his friends die. And now he was a prisoner. He wondered if he would ever see Calabria again. The British soldiers who captured them were not cruel. They took Giovanni's rifle, searched him for weapons, and gave him water. Real water, cold from a canteen. Giovanni drank it so fast he choked. A British soldier patted his back and smiled. Giovanni did not understand English, but he understood kindness. They walked in a long line of prisoners toward the coast. There were thousands of them, Italian boys from every village in Italy, all defeated, all afraid.
At the coast, they put Giovanni on a ship. It was crowded and dark below deck. Hundreds of men pressed together in the hold. The air was thick and hot. The ship rocked on the waves, and many men got sick. Giovanni sat against a metal wall and tried not to think. He heard rumors from other prisoners. Some said they were going to Britain. Some said Africa. One man swore they were going to America. "America?" another prisoner laughed. "They'll shoot us before we get there, or work us to death in mines." Giovanni had heard stories about American prisons from the fascist newspapers back home. They said Americans were barbaric. They said Americans hated Italians and treated prisoners worse than animals. The ship journey took 2 weeks. Giovanni lost track of the days. They fed the prisoners twice a day, thin soup and hard bread. It was less than Giovanni got in the army, and the army had starved him. His belt, which was already loose, had new holes punched in it. His ribs showed through his shirt. All around him, men whispered about what would happen next. Would they be put in cages? Would they be beaten? Would they ever go home? When the ship finally stopped, soldiers ordered them up onto the deck. Giovanni climbed a metal ladder and stepped out into sunlight. He squinted and put his hand over his eyes. They were in a harbor. Big buildings lined the shore. Cranes lifted cargo from other ships. American flags hung from poles. Giovanni had never seen an American flag in real life before. The red and white stripes, the blue corner with white stars, this was the enemy's country. This was the land Mussolini said Italy would defeat.
They loaded the prisoners onto trains. Giovanni had never seen a train so clean. The seats had cushions. The windows had glass that was not cracked. Guards stood at each end of the car, but they did not point their guns. They just watched. The train started moving, and Giovanni looked out the window. He saw farms with enormous fields. He saw tractors, big metal machines pulling plows. He saw cows, hundreds of cows, fat and healthy in green pastures. He saw houses with painted walls and glass windows. He saw roads that were paved and smooth. Everything looked impossible. Everything looked like a dream. The train traveled for a whole day. Giovanni watched America pass by outside his window. The country was so big. The farms went on forever. In Italy, farms were small plots of rocky land. Here, fields stretched to the horizon. Giovanni thought about his father's tiny vegetable garden. His father could fit his entire farm inside one of these American fields 10 times over. How could anyone fight a country with this much land? How could Italy, with its hungry villages and broken equipment, ever think it could win? Finally, the train stopped at a small station. Guards ordered the prisoners off. They marched in lines down a dirt road. Giovanni's legs ached. His stomach was so empty it had stopped hurting. They walked for maybe a mile, and then Giovanni saw it. The prison camp. His heart sank. Tall fences made of barbed wire surrounded rows of long buildings. Guard towers stood at each corner. Floodlights pointed down at the compound. This was it. This was where Giovanni would spend the war. Maybe this was where he would die.
But as they got closer, Giovanni noticed something strange. The buildings were not falling apart. They looked new. The ground inside the fence was not mud. Someone had put down gravel. There were trees planted in rows. Everything looked organized and clean. The guards opened the gate, and the prisoners walked inside. Giovanni expected cold concrete cells. He expected darkness and rats. Instead, they led him and 50 other men into a long wooden building. It had a roof that did not leak. It had windows with screens. Inside were rows of metal beds, each one with a mattress, a pillow, and 2 folded blankets. Giovanni touched the mattress. It was soft, not like the wooden boards he slept on at home, not like the desert sand he had used as a bed for months. An actual mattress? He looked at the other prisoners. They all had the same confused expression. An American officer came in and spoke through an Italian translator. The translator was an older Italian-American man with kind eyes. "You will sleep here," the translator said. "Each man gets 1 bed. You will keep the barracks clean. There are showers in the building next door. Hot water. You will shower tonight." Hot water? Giovanni hadn't had a hot shower in 2 years. In Africa, they washed with cold water from canteens when they could. At home in Calabria, his family heated water in pots on the stove. But hot showers? For prisoners? Then the translator said something that made Giovanni's stomach flip. "Dinner is in 1 hour. Report to the mess hall when you hear the bell."
Dinner. Giovanni was so hungry he felt dizzy, but he was also terrified. What would they feed prisoners? Rotten scraps? Moldy bread? He had heard stories about prison camps in Russia where men ate rats to survive. He thought about his last meal on the ship, watery soup that tasted like metal. The bell rang. The prisoners walked to another building. It was huge inside, with long tables and benches. At one end, Giovanni saw a serving line with big metal containers. Steam rose from them. The smell hit him like a physical force. Meat. Cooking meat. Giovanni had not smelled cooking meat in so long that he had almost forgotten what it was like. His mouth watered instantly. His hands started shaking. An American soldier handed him a metal tray. Another soldier handed him a metal cup. Giovanni moved down the line. A man in a white apron scooped food onto his tray. Giovanni watched, not believing his eyes. A thick piece of beef, brown and hot with juice running off it. A pile of white mashed potatoes with a square of yellow butter melting on top. Green beans, bright and steaming. A slice of white bread, soft and fresh. An apple. The cup got filled with milk. Real milk, white and cold.
Giovanni stood there holding his tray. The prisoner behind him bumped into him, and Giovanni moved to a table. He sat down. He stared at the food. Around him, other prisoners stared at their trays too. Nobody ate. Someone whispered, "It's poison. It has to be poison." Another man said, "Why would they feed us this just to poison us? They could have killed us on the ship." A third prisoner, an older man with gray hair, shook his head. "This is the last meal. They feed us good food before they shoot us. I heard they do this." Giovanni's stomach screamed at him to eat, but his mind screamed that something was wrong. This was not prison food. This was not food for enemies. This was better food than Giovanni had eaten in his entire life. This was food for rich people. This was food for officers.
Why would America give this to captured Italian soldiers? What did they want? What was the trick? Giovanni finally ate the steak. He cut a small piece with his fork and put it in his mouth. The taste exploded on his tongue. It was real. It was beef, tender and seasoned with salt and pepper. He had not eaten beef since he was a small child, maybe at a wedding when he was 7. His eyes filled with tears. Around him, other prisoners began eating too. Some ate slowly, savoring every bite. Others ate so fast they choked. One man threw up from eating too quickly after months of near starvation. But nobody died. The food was not poisoned. It was just food. Good food. Prison food that was better than anything they had eaten as free men in Italy.
The next morning, breakfast appeared in the same mess hall. Eggs. Giovanni counted 3 eggs on his plate. 3! Back home, his family of 6 shared 3 eggs on Sunday if they were lucky. Here, Giovanni got 3 eggs just for himself. There was also bacon, strips of crispy meat that tasted salty and rich. There were fried potatoes. There was toast with butter and jam. There was coffee, hot and black, as much as he wanted. Giovanni drank 2 full cups. He could not stop eating. His stomach hurt from being full for the first time in years. After breakfast, an American officer explained the camp rules through the translator. The prisoners would work. They would help on local farms because the war had taken most of the American men away to fight. The farms needed workers to pick crops. Any prisoner who worked would earn $8 each month. $8 was not much by American standards, but to Giovanni it was a fortune. The officer explained that they could use the money at something called the PX. The translator said it was like a store, right here in the camp. Giovanni could buy things: chocolate, cigarettes, soap, writing a paper. The idea seemed impossible. Prisoners could buy things with money they earned? Giovanni thought about his father working 14 hours a day and barely earning enough to feed the family. Giovanni thought about his mother standing in ration lines waiting for stamps that bought half a loaf of bread. And here, prisoners of war could earn money and buy chocolate?
The first workday came. Guards loaded Giovanni and 30 other prisoners onto a truck. It was a Ford truck, newer than any vehicle Giovanni had seen in Italy. The seats were cushioned. The engine ran smooth and quiet. They drove 10 miles to a farm owned by a man named Mr. Peterson. Mr. Peterson was in his 60s, with weathered hands and a kind face. He showed the prisoners what to do. They would pick sugar beets from his fields. The work was hard. Bending over, pulling beets from the dirt, filling baskets, carrying them to wagons. Giovanni's back ached by noon. But at noon, something amazing happened. Mr. Peterson's wife came out to the fields. She brought lunch for the prisoners. Not army rations, not hard bread. She brought sandwiches made with thick slices of ham, cheese, lettuce, and tomatoes. She brought apples. She brought a jug of cold lemonade, sweet and tart. The prisoners sat in the shade of Mr. Peterson's barn and ate. Giovanni bit into his sandwich and tasted the ham. It was better than the steak from the first night. The bread was soft. The cheese was creamy. He wanted to cry again. Mrs. Peterson smiled at the prisoners. She said something in English. The translator who had come with them said she hoped they liked the food. She said she knew they were far from home. She said she prayed the war would end soon. Giovanni stared at her. This American woman, whose country was fighting his country, had made him lunch. With her own hands, she had prepared food for enemy soldiers. And not just any food, good food. Food her own family would eat. Over the following weeks, Giovanni discovered more impossible things. The camp had a gymnasium where prisoners could play basketball and volleyball. It had a library with books in Italian. It had a theater where they showed movies once a week. American movies. Movies with cowboys and car chases and beautiful women. Giovanni had never been to a movie theater in his life. In his village, there was no theater. Only rich people in big cities saw movies. But here, prisoners watched movies for free. Every Sunday, a Catholic priest came to the camp. Father Michael was an old Italian-American man who spoke perfect Italian. He said Mass in a room the Americans had set up as a chapel. Giovanni went to Mass every week. It reminded him of home, of the small church in his village where his mother prayed every morning. After Mass, Father Michael would talk with the prisoners. He asked about their families. He wrote down names and addresses and promised to pray for them. Sometimes he brought cookies that the women from his church had baked. Giovanni ate the cookies and thought about his mother. She had not baked cookies in 3 years because there was no sugar.
The abundance never stopped. Every meal in the mess hall included meat. Beef, pork, chicken, fish. Always meat, always vegetables, always fresh bread, always milk or coffee. For dessert, sometimes they got cake, sometimes pie. Once, they got ice cream. Ice cream! Giovanni had heard of ice cream, but never tasted it. It was cold and sweet and melted on his tongue. He ate it slowly, trying to make it last forever. The camp had a PX, just like the officer said. Giovanni earned his first $8 after 1 month of work. He went to the PX with other prisoners. Inside, it looked like a small store. Shelves held candy bars, cigarettes, razors, combs, writing paper, envelopes, stamps. There were bottles of Coca-Cola in a cold box. Giovanni had never seen Coca-Cola before. The bottles were green glass with red labels. Other prisoners bought them and drank them fast. They said it tasted sweet and fizzy. Giovanni bought a candy bar instead. It cost 15 cents. He also bought paper and a pen so he could write home. That night, Giovanni sat on his bed and tried to write a letter to his mother. He wanted to tell her about the food. He wanted to tell her about the gymnasium and the movies and the ice cream. He wanted to tell her that the Americans were not monsters. They were not barbaric. They were feeding him better than he had ever been fed in his life. But he could not write these things. How could he explain? His mother would not believe him. She would think he was lying or crazy. She would think the Americans had tricked him somehow. So Giovanni wrote simple things instead. He wrote that he was healthy. He wrote that he was safe. He wrote that he missed home. He did not mention the steak.
Other prisoners struggled with the same problem. In the barracks at night, men talked quietly about the strange situation they were in. "My brother is fighting in Russia," one prisoner said. "He wrote that they are eating leather from their boots, and I'm eating beef every day. How is this possible?" Another prisoner said, "My mother's last letter said she traded her wedding ring for a bag of flour, and yesterday I bought a chocolate bar like it was nothing." The prisoners could not make sense of it. Some of the older prisoners, the ones who had believed in Mussolini and fascism, became quiet and withdrawn. One officer, Captain Benedetti, had been a true believer. He had shouted about Italian glory and the greatness of the fascist system, but now he sat alone at meals, staring at his plate. Giovanni heard him whisper once, "They told us America was weak. They told us Americans were soft and could not fight. But look at this place. Look at how much they have. How can this be a weakness?" Giovanni thought about that question constantly. He thought about it when he ate breakfast. He thought about it when he picked beets on Mr. Peterson's farm. He thought about it when he went to the PX and saw shelves full of things to buy. America was fighting a war on 2 sides of the world. America was sending millions of soldiers to Europe and to the Pacific. America was building tanks and planes and ships. And still, America had enough food to feed enemy prisoners better than Italian soldiers had ever been fed. Still, America had enough resources to build prison camps with gymnasiums and theaters. Still, America had enough wealth that prisoners could earn money and buy candy. The propaganda had been wrong. All of it. Mussolini had said America was collapsing, that Americans cared only about movies and money, that American soldiers were cowards who would run from battle. But if America was collapsing, why did every farm have tractors? Why did every road have cars? Why did every prisoner get 3 meals a day with meat? Giovanni remembered the newspapers in Italy that showed cartoons of fat, lazy Americans. The newspapers said Americans were weak, but this was not a weakness. This was power. This was strength beyond anything Giovanni had imagined. In late August, something special happened. Mr. Peterson invited Giovanni and 5 other prisoners to his house for Sunday dinner. An American officer approved it. The prisoners rode in Mr. Peterson's truck to his farmhouse. It was a big white house with a porch and flower gardens. Inside, it smelled like cooking food. Mrs. Peterson had made a feast: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, gravy, corn on the cob, fresh baked rolls, and for dessert, strawberry pie with cream. Giovanni sat at their dining table. Mr. and Mrs. Peterson sat with them. They held hands, and Mr. Peterson said a prayer, thanking God for the food and asking for the war to end. Then they ate together. An American family and 6 Italian prisoners of war eating Sunday dinner like friends. Mrs. Peterson asked about Giovanni's family through simple words and hand gestures. Giovanni showed her a photo of his mother and sister. Mrs. Peterson touched the photo gently and said something soft. The translator, who had come along, said she was praying for their safety.
After dinner, they sat on the porch and drank lemonade. The sun set over Mr. Peterson's fields. Everything was peaceful. Giovanni thought about his village in Calabria. He wondered if his house still stood or if bombs had destroyed it. He wondered if his sister was still alive. He wondered if his mother had enough food. And he felt a deep, painful confusion. He was a prisoner in an enemy country, and he was happier than he had been in years. He was eating better than he ever had. He was treated with kindness and respect. How could this be a prison? How could this be a punishment? On the truck ride back to camp, Giovanni sat in silence. The other prisoners were quiet too. Finally, one of them, a young man named Marco from Sicily, spoke. "If they treat their prisoners like this," Marco said quietly, "what must they do for their own people?" Nobody answered. But Giovanni thought about the question all night. America could afford to be generous to enemies. What did that say about America's power? What did that say about Italy's chances of winning this war? And what did it say about everything they had been told? September 8, 1943, started like any other day in the camp. Giovanni woke up at 6 in the morning. He put on his work clothes and walked to the mess hall for breakfast. The air smelled like autumn, cool and crisp. Leaves on the trees were turning yellow and orange. Giovanni had been a prisoner in America for almost a year now. He had stopped feeling surprised by the good food. He had stopped wondering when the abundance would end. This was simply how things were in America.
But that morning, something was different. Guards were running between buildings. Officers gathered in small groups, talking fast. The camp commander called all prisoners to the main yard. Over 1,000 men assembled in rows. Giovanni stood with his work group, waving. His heart beat fast. Had something terrible happened? Was the war over? Were they being sent somewhere else? The commander spoke through the translator. His voice was serious, but not angry. "Men," he said, "I have important news. Yesterday, September 8th, the Italian government surrendered to the Allied forces. Benito Mussolini has been arrested. Italy is no longer fighting against America and Britain. The war between our countries is over." Silence. Complete silence. Giovanni felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. Italy surrendered? Mussolini arrested? The war was over? Men around him started crying. Some fell to their knees. Others shouted with joy. Giovanni just stood there, frozen. He thought about his family. Were they safe? What did this mean for them? What did this mean for him? The commander continued speaking. "Because Italy has surrendered, you are no longer our enemies. You are now what we call Co-belligerence. That means we are on the same side now, fighting against Germany and Japan. The United States government is offering all of you a choice. You can join the Italian service units and work directly for the American Army. You will still be prisoners technically, but you will be treated as helpers, not enemies. You will get better jobs, more freedom to move around, and a chance for early return to Italy when the war fully ends. Or you can refuse and remain as regular prisoners. The choice is yours. Giovanni's mind spun. Join the American Army? Help America win the war against Germany? Germany had been Italy's ally. But Germany had also treated Italian soldiers like slaves. Giovanni remembered German officers yelling at Italian troops in the desert, calling them worthless and weak. He remembered how Germany took Italy's best equipment and gave Italians broken guns and old tanks. And now, Germany occupied northern Italy. German soldiers were in Italian cities, taking Italian food, hurting Italian people. That night, prisoners argued in the barracks. Some older men, loyal fascists, refused to even consider the offer. "It is betrayal," one captain shouted. "We took an oath to Italy. We cannot break that oath." But younger prisoners saw things differently. "Italy surrendered," Marco said. "Mussolini is gone. We do not owe anything to Germany. And look at how Americans treat us. They feed us, they pay us, they respect us. Why would we not help them?" Giovanni lay in his bed that night and thought hard. He thought about his village. He thought about his hungry sister and his exhausted father. He thought about the lies Mussolini had told about America being weak and cruel. He thought about the steak on his first night. He thought about Mrs. Peterson making sandwiches for enemy prisoners. He thought about Father Michael praying for Italian families. America had defeated Italy in battle, but then America had shown mercy. America had power, but used it with kindness. What did Giovanni owe to a government that had lied to him and starved his family? What did he owe to Germany, which had never cared about Italian soldiers? The next morning, Giovanni signed the papers. He joined the Italian service unit. So did most of the prisoners in his camp. Out of the 1,000 men there, only about 50 refused. Those 50 men, the hardcore fascists who still believed in Mussolini, were moved to a different camp in Texas. Giovanni never saw them again. The rest put on new uniforms. They were still marked as Italian, with special patches that said Italy on the sleeves. But they were no longer treated as enemies. They were workers, helpers, almost like American soldiers, but not quite. Christmas of 1944 became a day Giovanni would never forget. The prisoners organized a special program in the mess hall. They had permission from the camp commander to create their own celebration. Some prisoners who had been musicians before the war formed a small orchestra. They had instruments provided by something called the YMCA, an American charity organization. Giovanni played no instrument, but he helped decorate the hall with paper chains and drawings of snow and stars. On Christmas Eve, American officers were invited to join the celebration. They sat at tables with the prisoners. The orchestra played Italian Christmas songs. Everyone sang together, even the Americans who did not know the words. The kitchen staff, both American and Italian prisoners working together, prepared a feast. Roasted turkey, ham, potatoes with gravy, vegetables, bread rolls, and 3 kinds of pie. There was even wine, just a little bit, brought by Father Michael from his church. Giovanni sat next to an American lieutenant named James. Lieutenant James was from Iowa, a farming state. He showed Giovanni a photo of his wife and baby son. Through broken English and hand gestures, they talked about farming and family and hopes for peace. When dinner ended, the prisoners gave small handmade gifts to the Americans. Giovanni had carved a small wooden cross for Lieutenant James. The lieutenant's eyes got wet when Giovanni gave it to him. He shook Giovanni's hand and said grazie, using the Italian word for thank you.
After the meal, the camp commander stood up to speak. He said he was proud of the prisoners for their hard work. He said he respected their courage in choosing to help end the war. He said he hoped they would all return home safely to their families when peace came. Then he said something that made Giovanni's chest tight. "You men have shown me," the commander said, "that enemies can become friends. That is what we are fighting for, a world where people choose friendship over hate." That night, Giovanni lay in his bed and thought about everything. He thought about the boy he had been in Calabria, believing the government radio speeches about Italian greatness and American weakness. He thought about the soldier he had been in Africa, fighting for a cause he did not understand. And he thought about the man he was now, a prisoner who had more freedom and dignity than he ever had as a soldier in his own army.
Giovanni pulled out his diary, a small notebook he had bought at the PX. He wrote slowly by the light of a small lamp. "Today, we were served turkey, potatoes with gravy, 3 vegetables, pie with ice cream. My mother has not seen butter in 2 years. My sister wrote that she trades her coat for a chicken. Here, I am a prisoner, and I eat like a king. What does this mean for Italy? What does this mean for everything we were told? The Americans defeated us with guns and tanks, but they also defeated us with kindness and abundance. They showed us that everything Mussolini said was a lie. America is not weak. America is strong in ways we never imagined. And that strength comes from freedom and plenty, not from fear and hunger. I do not know what will happen when I return home, but I know I will never forget what I learned here. I learned that a nation's true power is not in its weapons. It is in how it treats even its enemies." May 1946. The war in Europe had ended exactly 1 year ago. The war with Japan ended in August. Now, finally, Giovanni was going home. He stood on the deck of a transport ship in New York Harbor, watching America disappear behind him. 2 years and 8 months. That was how long he had been a prisoner. But the prisoner felt like the wrong word. He had learned English. He had earned over $200 working on American farms. He had gained 30 pounds of healthy weight. His duffel bag was stuffed with things he was taking home: canned food, coffee, chocolate bars, soap, new socks, a wool blanket, and photos of the people he had met.
The ship crossing back to Italy took 12 days. Giovanni shared a cabin with 5 other former prisoners. They were all going home, but nobody felt purely happy. They talked late into the night about what they would find. Marco, Giovanni's friend from Sicily, worried his house had been bombed. Another man named Paolo had received no letters from his wife in 8 months. Giovanni's last letter from his mother came in February. She wrote that they were surviving on food from American aid packages. She did not say more, but Giovanni knew what surviving meant. It meant barely living. It meant still being hungry. On the 13th day, they saw land, Italy. The ship docked in Naples. Giovanni walked down the metal ramp and stepped onto Italian soil for the first time since 1941, 5 years ago. He had been 19 when he left. Now he was 24. The dock looked like a nightmare. Buildings were broken and collapsed. Piles of rubble lined the streets. The harbor water was dirty and smelled like oil and rot. Dozens of children, skinny as skeletons, swarmed around the soldiers getting off the ship. They begged in high, desperate voices. "Pane, pane," they cried. "Bread, bread." Giovanni reached into his duffel bag and pulled out chocolate bars. He handed them to the children. They grabbed them and ran away like wolves fighting over meat. Giovanni's hands shook. These were Italian children, his people, and they looked worse than any prisoner he had seen in America. Their clothes were rags, their feet were bare and bleeding, their eyes were huge in their thin faces. One little girl, maybe 6 years old, reminded Giovanni of his sister. He gave her a whole can of peaches from his bag. She held it like treasure and ran away crying.
The train from Naples to Calabria took 8 hours. Giovanni stared out the window the whole time. The countryside was destroyed. Fields that should have been planted with crops were empty and burned. Farmhouses were bombed to rubble. Bridges were broken. In towns, people walked slowly like ghosts. Everyone looked thin and gray. Giovanni saw no cars on the roads. He saw no tractors in the fields. He saw only people pulling carts by hand and old women bent over tiny gardens. When the train finally reached his village, Giovanni grabbed his duffel bag and stepped off. The station was damaged but still standing. He walked up the familiar road toward his family's house. His heart pounded. Every building he passed was marked by war. Some had holes from bullets. Some had roofs burned away. The church had lost its bell tower. The school was completely gone, just a pile of stones. Then he saw his house. It was still there. The stone walls stood. The roof had some damage, but had been patched with metal sheets. Smoke came from the chimney. Someone was home. Giovanni started running. He dropped his heavy bag and ran up the path. He pushed open the wooden door and shouted, "Mama!"
His mother appeared from the kitchen. She was so thin Giovanni almost did not recognize her. Her hair had gone completely gray. Her dress hung loose on her body. But her eyes were the same. She screamed and ran to him. She grabbed him and held him and cried into his chest. "Giovanni, Giovanni, you are alive. You are real. You are home." His father came in from outside, moving slowly with a cane. His sister, now 12 years old, peeked around a doorway. She was small for her age, thin and pale, but she smiled when she saw Giovanni. They sat around the table in the kitchen. Giovanni looked at the room. It was the same room from his childhood, but everything looked smaller and more worn. The table had burn marks. The chairs were held together with wire. Through the window he could see the vegetable garden. It was tiny and had only a few struggling plants. His mother made tea using leaves she had dried herself. There was no sugar. There was no milk. She cut a small loaf of dark bread into 4 pieces and put them on plates. "This is dinner," she said quietly. "I am sorry it is not more." Giovanni could not speak. He got up and went outside to his duffel bag. He brought it inside and opened it on the floor. His family stared as he pulled out the things he had brought: canned meat, canned vegetables, coffee, sugar, chocolate, soap, the wool blanket. His mother fell to her knees and touched the cans like they were holy objects. His sister grabbed a chocolate bar and held it to her chest, not eating it, just holding it. His father sat down heavily in his chair and put his face in his hands. That night, Giovanni opened a can of beef stew and heated it on the stove. His family ate slowly, savoring every bite. It was the first meat they had eaten in over a year. Giovanni watched the meat and felt sick. This was his family's first good meal in years, and it came from a can Giovanni had bought at a prison camp store in America for free money he earned picking vegetables. Giovanni pulled out the photos he had brought. He showed his mother pictures of the camp, pictures of the mess hall, pictures of Mr. Peterson's farm, pictures of himself standing next to American soldiers, smiling. His mother looked at the photos, and her face got strange. "This was your prison?" she whispered. "This was where they kept you?" Giovanni nodded. She touched the photo of the mess hall. "It looks better than the mayor's house before the war." Over the next weeks, Giovanni tried to explain to people in the village what America was like, but nobody believed him. They thought he was exaggerating or lying.
"You ate meat every day?" they would ask. "Every single day?" Giovanni would nod. "And ice cream? You had ice cream in prison?" Giovanni would nod again. They would shake their heads like he was crazy. But some people understood. Father Antonio, the village priest, listened carefully to Giovanni's stories. "America did not just defeat us with weapons," the priest said. "They defeated us with wealth. They showed us that everything our government told us was backwards. We thought fascism made Italy strong, but it made us weak and poor. We thought America was soft, but America was so strong they could be generous even to enemies." Giovanni got a job helping to rebuild the village. He worked on fixing houses and roads. At night, he wrote letters. He wrote to Mr. Peterson, thanking him for his kindness. He wrote to Lieutenant James, asking about his family. He wrote to Father Michael. And he filled out papers, careful official papers, and applied for permission to immigrate to America. 2 years later, in 1948, Giovanni's papers were approved. He said goodbye to his family. His mother cried, but told him to go. "Find a good life," she said. "Send us letters, send us photos, and remember where you came from." Giovanni promised he would. He took a ship back across the Atlantic. This time, he was not a prisoner. He was a free man going to a land where he knew he could build something better. Years later, Giovanni would tell his American-born children about the war. He would tell them about the first night in camp when he thought the steak was poison. He would tell them about Mrs. Peterson's sandwiches and Father Michael's cookies and Christmas dinner with turkey and pie. And he would tell them the most important lesson he learned. America did not win the war just because of guns and bombs, he would say. America won because it had something worth fighting for. Freedom makes people strong. Plenty makes nations powerful. Your grandfather learned that as a prisoner of war, and he never forgot it. The steak was never just about food. It was about what a nation becomes when it values freedom over control, abundance over scarcity, and kindness over cruelty. Giovanni learned that lesson in a prison camp in America, and it changed everything he believed about power, about nations, and about what it means to be truly strong. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.